Welcome everyone to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am DM Bloodworth, and as you can see by the graphics today, I'm going to be talking about magic in MYFAROG. And this is specifically MYFAROG 3.0. It's a third part, of my review of this new edition of the game. And very briefly, one of the things that Varg, the author, had pointed out to me in a tweet was that magic in 3.0 is a little bit weaker than it was in 2.7 and earlier, but also he stated that it's more aligned with the traditional beliefs and lore around magic. So when you enter Thule 3.0, the game setting, you're going to see that magic is very much different. It's also more varied. So not only is it overall weaker, it's a greater variety of it, and now there are more classes that can perform various magics, including bards, sorcerers, elves, dwarves, gnomes, and orcs. And I'm going to get into each of the character roles and talk about what requirements they each have in order to unlock the ability to use magic, and then get into the last part where I'll actually talk about some of the specific magic spells that are available to them. So let's jump right into it and start taking a look at the book. I might have to adjust the camera slightly to see how everything is lining up. We'll see if this works out. Now, I'll just jump to this really quick. So here is the book, and it's the core rules, all self-contained into one volume, and all of these little tabs here are once again the tabs that are just related to the things I'm going to talk about related to magic. So again, it might seem very complex. Oh my gosh, there's 15 different tabs that are here for explaining the magic system, but it's a lot simpler than what it appears, because the character roles have specific magic types. So once you choose your character role and you're dealing with that specific magic type, you can ignore all of the other pages. So it really does matter which role you're playing, and then how much depth you have to go into the overall magic system. So once again, I'm going to jump right to the book here. Okay, so, and we'll see if we can turn right to the first tab, wherever that might be. Let's see. This seems to be the first tab. All right, so character roles. So here on page 27, so fairly early on in the booklet, we have the character roles, and the first character role that we learn about that is magic capable are bards. So bards are servants to deities, and so they have to have the religious stance. All right, so that's a requirement. Sorcerers are spellcasters that are mainly associated with the different elements of the world, and so they'll have a traditional life stance, and they will focus on those elemental magics and so on. So right from the beginning, you get that differentiation between the two types of magic schools, if you will. One is religious based, and the other is elemental based. And only humans can be bards or sorcerers. And then the demi-human races of elf, dwarf, gnome, and orc have their own specific racial spell abilities that I'll go into as well. So let's move on. So when we get here to those actual human roles. So a bard must be of high birth, must have a religious high life stance, must have a 16 or greater charisma, and the marked talent. So if you're creating a bard character, that's your intention, you have to make sure that you're putting a 16 in your attribute for charisma, and you must also select the marked talent as a as a choice at first level. Now, you can actually end up with this just by chance, depending on when your character is actually born. So you actually might fall right into having this talent automatically, and then you'd have a second talent, but it is usually quite rare. Going on down to Sorcerer, they must also be of high birth, a traditional life stance, an intelligence of a 13, a wisdom of a 13, and also the marked talent. All right, so in order to construct right from the start a Sorcerer, they have to make sure that they have at least 13s in those two attributes, and also the marked talent, which you might be lucky enough to roll it, or you'll have to select it if that's your choice to go. Dwarves. Dwarves starting out, if they have a positive modifier, which is the 13, so a 13 will give a +1. So they need to have a 13 in intelligence and wisdom in order to unlock spells, and they will be able to unlock spells at first level. Elves, the same thing. An elf, it's down here. I don't know if you can quite see elf, but an elf also at first level, positive modifiers in both intelligence and wisdom. That will also allow them to start at second level, and that's the same with the dwarf as well. So they actually wouldn't start at first level. They would start as you create them. They'd start out as second level characters. An orc does not get its spell ability until level 10, where they have to have a positive intelligence and willpower, and they can, it starts at level 10, and they can cast orc spells. If it does not have the positive intel and will later on, but it improves to that level, they can then gain the ability to cast spells. So your characters may not start off with with spell ability, but they could eventually develop it later on if that's the way that you're going with your character. Gnomes at first level, positive intelligence and willpower, and then they would start at second level if you have both of those, and they will have access to spell ability. So those are all of the character races and classes that have spells, and we can move on to the next. Bards in particular. So it says bards can learn. So now we're going to bard. A bard can learn spells. A bard begins playing knowing a weak spell known by his favorite deity. See alignment and see sorcery. And then they gain more and more as they're going up in level. Moving on down, a ranger gains sorcery spells at first level, provided that the ranger also has those necessary positives within those categories of sorcery spells. And I'll get to that in a little bit more detail now as I go to sorcerer. So a sorcerer, let's see if I can get this down over here. There we go. Let's see, hopefully it does catch up. A sorcerer can learn fire and air spells. To learn earth spells, he must also have a positive in strength. So that means intelligence, willpower, and strength must be +1 or 13 in each of those in order to have fire, air, and earth. To learn water, the character must have a positive in constitution. To learn spirit spells, he must have a positive in charisma. If later they accumulate those attributes as they're developing the character, they can then add on those that access to different spells as they're going along. So really, if your wizard character has positives in all of those attribute areas, they could really start off with the ability to access fire, air, earth, and water spells open to them. So, and then we finally I don't know if I saw Gnome. I mentioned Gnome already. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next section. And again, as much as this seems to be very detailed, once you've selected your character race or your character role, you could start to just ignore the rest of this information that's coming along. So special to bards, and there's a whole section here that's dealing with bards, their favorite deities, and their allowed weapons based on those favorite deities, their clothing in sacred colors, and so what they would wear. All right, and so based on, so let's say you have a bard that's devoted to Balder. Their allowed weapons are swords, swords and short swords. So a regular length sword, like a long sword, a short sword. Their clothing in sacred colors would be yellow, gold, white, or orange. All right, and so they do have to, wear these garments and use these allowed weapons in order to favor, whichever god they happen to choose. Sorcerers need certain materials on their staff in order to cast spells. So sorcerers have the requirements of auricular outcome. I cannot say that word. I'm sorry. Or iron. For earth spells, that's for air spells. For earth spells, they need bone or rock plus aurichalcum or talcum, electrum or gold. So they have several choices there. Spirit spells, they need crystal, pearl, or rock. And water spells, they need copper, electrum, or silver. All of that attached to their staff. So they do have these material requirements in order to cast sorcery-based spells. So that's the section on specials for sorcerers. So now I'm on pages 34 and 35. Here we have, oh, that's what I just was looking at which tab I was supposed to go to. So the next tab in the line, I believe, is here. And Rune Lore. Rune Lore is required for sorcery, and I'll come on down here. Rune Lore, so that's a skill that you're going to want to develop if you're looking to become a sorcerer. Is Rune Lore here, and religious tradition if you're going to develop a bard along the way. So those are their two skill areas that you really want to focus on for your two main spellcasters. Rangers, to a lesser extent, but they will follow the sorcery rules. And I'll probably go into a little bit more detail with Rangers kind of separately, because Rangers are an interesting class. And we will now jump to actual sorcery, so casting of spells. Once your character has their attributes necessary for unlocking spell ability, they now have to take a look at their attributes and their attribute modifier to determine how many spells per per day they'll be able to cast. And so for bards, that's based on their charisma. So if they have a charisma with just a modifier of +1, then they're only going to be able to cast one spell per day. If it's +2, they'll obviously have 2 spells per day. So unless they're very high attribute modifier, they're not going to be able to cast very many spells. And I think this has to do with where Varg was talking about the spellcasters are not as powerful as they were in the previous editions. So they are limited in the amount of spells that they will have. So a spellcaster can cast spells by singing songs or citing poetic spells, formulas, or by drawing symbols in the air, on the ground, in the wood, or elsewhere. The spell proficiency of a dwarf, elf, orc, or gnome, or sorcerer is always the same as his runic lore proficiency. The spell proficiency for a bard or a ranger is always the same as his religious tradition proficiency. In order to cast spells, the sorcerer, but not the dwarf, elf, orc, or gnome, needs a sorcerer's staff to attract and manipulate the spirits of nature and to channel their powers. Without the staff, the sorcerer cannot cast spells at all. Bards and rangers must use a wand, a branch from a sacred tree growing in a temple, when casting spells to channel their powers or their deities. All right, so see specials for sorcerers, specials for bards, and in the character general and development section. The number of times each known spell can be cast every day from sunrise to sunrise is the same as the character's charisma, strength, intelligence, constitution, or they put strength twice, as shown below. If a spellcaster has only 1 + 0 or even a negative attribute modifier, he will not be able to cast spells until he improves his relevant attribute. So, well, I guess if they have multiple positives across the board, they will have more spells, or each known spell. Let me reread that. A number of times each known spell can be cast every day. All right, so actually they'll have more spells than just, one particular spell. It's one time for each known spell per modifier that they have in the requisite skill category. All spells are either weak, normal, strong, or mighty. All right, so we're getting to the different powers of swords. I'm coming down here. So characters casting spells must do so sitting, standing, or walking. A spellcaster must learn each and every spell as he wishes to cast. And that goes into the section on experience points, character generation, and development. Might actually have to spend some more time on spells and break this down into more than one video. So this is kind of an overview, because it is growing kind of complex here for each. Minimum spell proficiency to learn spells that are weak. So the bard needs a proficiency of 1. Two and 4 for weak spells. 4, 6, or 8 for normal. 8, 10, and not applicable for strong. They need a 12 in proficiency in order to do a mighty spell for spells known to favorite deity. All right, so they have to be really quite proficient in order to unlock the mighty spell. And that's in their skill category that they need to focus on. Dwarves, weak is 2, normal is 6, 10, and 12. So you can see that 12 is at pretty much the highest proficiency level in order to unlock those mighty spells. So it's going to take a long, long time in order for them to get to the level and the skill proficiency in order to unlock those spells. Elven spells, as we'll go through this list a little bit. You have Bird Song, which has a weak, a normal, a strong, and a mighty variation of it. And basically what they do with when you're dealing with one type of spell. So a Bird Song is a short, one sentence, maximum 3 words message, can be delivered to anyone known by name. Up to 10 miles away is weak, up to 20 miles away is normal, up to 40 miles away is strong, and up to 80 miles away is mighty. Using a bird, the bird will deliver that message in a form of a short song within 1 to 4 hours. The time it takes to cast it is 1 round. Any bird within talking distance of the spell's caster. So that's the range. So you basically deliver a message via bird up to a distance as far as 80 miles away. So there's calm animal, and there are 4 categories or levels of calming an animal all the way up to mighty. We'll just take a look at mighty. So it's based on the size of the animal. So a colossal sized animal would be mighty, and they would be able to calm a colossal sized animal. And obviously the smallest size are, fairly small creatures for the weakness. Elven Charm, Elven Dance, and so on. So they do go through Elven Enchantment, Grace, Healing, Lights, Lore, Music, Sleep, and so on. Let's go to a different group here. So dwarves. I was talking in the last video about creating a dwarven character. So dwarven characters can cast craft. All right. So the spellcaster gets a +2 on the weak, a +4 on the normal, a +6 on the strong, or a +8 on the mighty mod to any one crafts skill test. So he or she can cast a spell when they're getting prepared to crafting an item, and then that would add a bonus to their crafting ability in order to make a higher quality item. Dwarven enchantment. A weapon will be enchanted to work particularly well against elves, ettins, orcs, or trolls. Damage is a +1 for normal, +2 or +3 for mighty. And so this is how dwarves can now start crafting magic weapons that will be specific to attacking and doing additional hit and damage to those select types of creatures. Dwarven lore, senses, speech, runes of closing, runes of hiding, runes of opening, and so on. We get to gnomes, and gnomes here have kind of an illusionary bent to them, which is very similar to actually Dungeons and Dragons. Gnomes tended to have a higher level of illusionist that they could follow up that tree. So gnomes have illusion, illumination, invisibility, mirror image, maze. The target is I'll read maze to you. The target is teleported into a maze in a spirit world. He needs to spend 3d6 intelligence, minus intelligence minutes in the maze to get back out. He will never need less than 1 minute to find his way out. When he finds his way out, he will reappear exactly where he was when teleported. Normal would be 16, strong would be 20, and mighty would be 24. This is the fortitude defense. So you'd have to roll a 12, a 16, a 20, or a 24 in order to avoid getting cast into that maze. The Gnome Flute. The spellcaster gets a +1, +2, +4, +6, or +8 mod to any one flute playing skill ability. Orcs get Black Sky. Black Sky, the entire sky as far as the eye can see, turns cloudy and dark as night. It'll last for 2d6 minutes. It's a normal spell, so there's only one level of that spell, and it is normal. And the deity that gives him that is Bull. I guess it's Bullthorn. Bullthorn. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that symbol. Fear of the Dark is a weak or normal. Goblin Rune is weak or normal. Orcish Healing is weak or normal. Necromancy is weak or normal. So they don't have very many, if any, really strong magics that I can see here. Summon Etten is normal. Let's see. Yeah, so they don't have any much more powerful spells than that. Although summoning an Etten is pretty powerful considering you would roll on a d20 and you can actually summon some pretty hefty creatures here. So that's not much of a joke. And that. Sorcery spells. Air spells. We have Insight, Lore, Shield, Protection, Conscience, Reconciliation. Let's take a look at that. A single hostile human or demi-human will become suspicious instead. The target must test his fortitude against a 12 on the weak, a 16 on the normal, a 20 on the strong, and a 24 on the mighty to avoid the effect. 1 round per spell level of the caster. And the deity for that is Forsetti. There's Aggression, Bane Weapon, Smite, Drums of... I'm over here now. Drums of War, Remembrance, Foreknowledge. Earth spells, you have Berserk, Courage, Leather Boot. Let's see, Leather Boot. So 4 levels of this. The target will enjoy a +1, +2, +3, or +4 mod to their armor value for the duration of the spell. So Leather Boot is basically like an armor reinforcement. All right, Darkness, Divine Aim is for missile weapons, obviously. Wool, let's see, Wool will give cold and heat resistance. So you can see here that each of the elementals are giving some different spells and different spell attack effects that are kind of tied into their element. So when I get to fire here, I'm assuming that I'm going to see quite a bit that have to do with fire or light and such. So the Day Rune, marked with a dagger rune, will modify the results when checking for Etten phenomenon with a +1, +2, +3, or +4. Deity is Baldur for that. It is permanent. The Light of the Mind, target gets a +2 through +8. Mod to any one Fortitude skill test or morale test. Divine Music. Fire. So here we go. So a lifeless and flammable object starts to burn. Anyone hit by the concussion weapon wielded by spellcaster suffers an additional d6 of heat damage normal. Anyone hit by a concussion weapon wielded by a spellcaster suffering an additional 2d6 heat is strong, and 3d6 all the way up to mighty is 3d6. Okay. The deity for that is Vali, and so on. So we get to the water spells here. They're interesting. Rain is on that side. Wind and waves, thirst, moonlight, 7 Mile boots. So traveling here under water spells. Moonride, love, hatred, rose rune, heat, signature, ghost feet. Let's see what ghost feet is. This must be spirit. I must have missed the category. Yes, I must have missed the category. Water spells. I don't see spirit. Oh, there it is. So awareness, Bifrost, haste, and I'm not even going to try to say Jalarhorn. A hunting horn blown will wake up everyone within 7 miles of the spellcaster. Weak. Adds a +2 modifier to all morale tests. Normal. Under mighty, it'll enemies will be terrified for 3d6, and so on. So there's a large variety of spells. And once again, you don't have to focus on all of them. You only have to focus on the ones that are directly related to your character and your focus, where your attributes kind of leave you focused towards which skill types that you decide to improve along, whether it be religious tradition or rune lore, is going to be your basis for your skill levels that apply to the spells and the 4 levels of spells that you'll have the use of. So once again, I thank you for joining in. I hope that you're learning a lot about this system from these little videos. If there's anything that's unclear, please feel free to leave a comment in there, and I will make sure that when I'm done with all of these videos breaking down this game system for you, that I will go back and make some corrections if there's something that I wasn't clear about. And if you had a different read, a different take on something that I mentioned here, please feel free to leave that in there as well, and I'll get back. And once again, I will do kind of a rehash over some of these things if I've missed anything or misinterpreted something. So once again, thanks for joining. I look forward to seeing you on the gaming screen sometime very soon. If you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing. Leave comments, give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video, and once again, if you haven't jumped into this game yet, I strongly encourage you to take a look at MYFAROG 3.0, because it really is it's a great game system. It's a lot of fun to play. I had the pleasure of playing an entry level session of this a couple days ago, sometime early last week, and I'm looking to do a little bit more of that going forward before I get into the full swing of getting back to work in early September. So again, thanks for joining. Have a good night.